Since he got a new colleague, my husband no longer wants to talk to me. Since he got a new colleague, my husband no longer wants to talk to me. My name is Claire Donovan. And let me tell you something. Silence is far louder than any fight. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The silence started at the kitchen table. For years, Michael and I had a rhythm. He'd come home, loosen his tie, and I'd ask about his day while I stirred the pot on the stove. Sometimes he'd complain about his boss, sometimes he'd laugh about an office joke, and sometimes he'd just sigh and say he was tired. But there was always something. Words. A thread connecting us through the ordinary. Now nothing. Michael sat across from me with his plate untouched, scrolling on his phone, the blue light reflecting in his glasses. The clinking of my fork against the plate echoed too loudly like a hammer striking glass. I asked about his day, but he only muttered, "Busy." No details, no stories, just one word as though speaking more would be a waste. At first I thought he was just tired. I told myself maybe work had piled up, maybe stress had stolen his energy. I tried to give him space. But as days turned into weeks, the silence grew into a wall. I still spoke about the school play my students were rehearsing, about the neighbor's new puppy, about my sister's phone call. But Michael's responses shrank thinner than threads, barely holding us together. One night, I pushed my chair back and leaned closer. "Michael, is everything all right?" He didn't even look up. "I'm fine. Just tired." Tired. That word became his shield, the one excuse he wrapped himself in like a blanket, keeping me out. But if he was so tired, why did his eyes light up when his phone buzzed? Why did his thumb dance so eagerly across the screen when he thought I wasn't watching? I wasn't paranoid. Not yet. But I knew something had shifted. Marriage doesn't break with an explosion, it erodes grain by grain like sand slipping through your fingers. And I could feel the erosion happening right in front of me. The bed, once warm with shared whispers, grew colder. Michael turned his back to me more often. He carried the scent of a different cologne, one he hadn't worn in years. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was withdrawal. At school, while my students read aloud passages from Shakespeare, I caught myself drifting. I stared at Juliet's desperate words, thinking about how a love that had once felt eternal could wither into something so brittle. At night, lying in the dark, I replayed our history. 17 years of marriage, countless anniversaries, holidays, and quiet Sundays. The man who once touched my hand under the table just to remind me I wasn't alone was now a stranger sitting 3 feet away, drowning in silence. And the silence. Oh, it had weight. It pressed on my chest like a stone. I started to notice his schedule shifting. He'd leave earlier in the mornings, claiming he had early meetings. He'd come back later, his tie loosened, but his energy strangely lifted, not the exhaustion of overwork, but the distracted lightness of someone whose mind was elsewhere. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. A teacher's mind is trained to look for patterns, but sometimes patterns can deceive. Yet every instinct in me whispered the same word: distance. It wasn't until one ordinary Tuesday that the first crack showed. I was washing dishes, my hands covered in suds, when Michael walked in, humming under his breath. Humming. I hadn't heard that in weeks. "What's got you in such a good mood?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He froze just for a split second before replying. "Nothing. Just had a productive day." But I saw it, the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the kind of pause that tells you the words are only half the truth. That night, when he slipped into bed without a word, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning above me. My gut twisted. Something was wrong. Marriage teaches you to read silence like a language, and Michael's silence screamed. The next morning, I caught myself studying him like one of my students struggling with a poem, searching for meaning between the lines. His suit looked sharper, pressed more carefully. He sprayed just a little too much cologne. He lingered by the mirror longer than usual, smoothing his hair. For whom? Not for me. I wanted to shake him, to demand answers. But the fear of those answers kept me still. If he admitted what I was starting to suspect, our fragile balance would shatter. And part of me still clung to the hope that I was imagining it all. But deep down, I knew the truth was already knocking at the door. It always begins with silence. And in that silence, I started to lose the man I once knew. That was the beginning. Just silence in the kitchen, but it was enough to unravel everything that came next. It was a Saturday afternoon when her name first appeared in our lives. Anna. Michael and I were sitting on the porch, him with his laptop open, me, trying to read a book, but unable to concentrate. The distance between us was unbearable, and yet I stayed desperate for some thread of connection. Out of nowhere, he chuckled at his screen. A light sound, brief, but it pierced me. I hadn't heard him laugh like that in weeks. "What's funny?" I asked, trying to sound playful. "Nothing," he said quickly, too quickly. His hand brushed over the trackpad, closing whatever he was looking at. But then, as if realizing the abruptness of his tone, he added, "Just something Anna said at work." Anna. The name slid into the air and settled like dust that refuses to be brushed away. "Anna?" I repeated, careful to keep my voice neutral. He nodded, barely looking up. "New colleague. She started a couple of months ago. Smart girl. Always cracking jokes. Smart girl. Cracking jokes." That was the longest sentence he had given me in weeks, and it wasn't about me. It wasn't about us. It was about her. I smiled faintly, though my stomach nodded. "Sounds like she keeps the office lively." "Yeah," he said. His tone softened in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "She makes the long hours bearable." Bearable. He said it like she was a light cutting through the monotony of his days. The book in my hands blurred. I pressed my thumb against the page, steadying myself. In that moment, something inside me shifted, not a full understanding, but the uneasy recognition that this Anna was not just another coworker. The following week, I began to notice her presence everywhere, though I had never met her. Michael mentioned her name casually in conversation, like slipping a pebble into my shoe. Tiny, constant irritations I couldn't ignore. "Anna figured out the numbers before anyone else. Anna knows all the best places for lunch. Anna's got such a sharp sense of humor." Each mention chipped away at me. It wasn't just the words, it was his voice when he said them. His tone carried a warmth I hadn't heard in months. Not when he spoke to me. Not even when he looked at me. One evening, I set dinner on the table and asked him if he wanted wine. "Anna says," he began, then stopped abruptly, his lips pressing together. "Anna says what I asked," forcing my voice to stay steady. He shrugged. "Nothing. Just, she likes this new wine bar downtown. Forget it." I stared at him, my fork suspended in midair. He was quoting her. Bringing her preferences into our home, into our conversation. That night, when he rolled over in bed, turning his back to me, I whispered into the dark, "Who are you, Michael? And who is she to you?" Of course, there was no answer. Days passed, each one heavy with the name that now lingered between us. Anna. The ghost of a woman I had never seen but already despised. At school, I found myself distracted during class. My students read poetry aloud, but my mind was elsewhere. I scribbled Anna in the margins of my lesson plans, then furiously scratched it out as if erasing her name could erase her from my life. I tried to push away the thoughts. Tried to remind myself that colleagues sometimes become friends. That laughter doesn't always mean betrayal. But deep inside, my instincts clawed at me. I knew the way men change when someone new sparks something inside them. I knew it from stories whispered by colleagues, from novels where the wife is left wondering how she missed the signs. And I knew it from the silence that had grown between Michael and me. One evening, as he showered, I picked up his phone from the nightstand. I told myself I wasn't snooping, just checking the time. But the screen lit up with a notification, "Anna, you're impossible." The kind of message that carried intimacy wrapped in humor. the kind of message that wasn't meant for a wife to see. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, my pulse hammering in my ears. When Michael came out of the bathroom toweling his hair, I forced myself to act normal. He kissed me absently on the cheek, but I could feel it. His lips were elsewhere, his laughter reserved for someone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the notification again and again in my mind. Who was Anna really? Just a colleague? Or something more? And if she was something more, then what did that make me now? The silence was no longer just silence. It was filled with her name, with her laughter, with her presence that had crept into my home without ever stepping through the door. I turned on my side, staring at Michael's back, and whispered into the dark, "You're slipping away from me, aren't you?" But he only slept, breathing evenly as if my voice had never existed. The seed had been planted. Anna was no longer just a name. She was the shadow stretching across my marriage, and I knew deep in my bones that this was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. Michael's late nights started gradually, like rain that begins with a drizzle before becoming a storm. At first, it was once or twice a week. He'd call just before dinner time, his voice clipped, rehearsed. "I'll be late tonight. Big project." I told myself it was normal. Offices had deadlines. People worked late. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife checking the clock. But the pattern grew. 3 nights. 4. Eventually, it felt as if I was living alone, setting a plate at the table for a ghost who never showed. When he did come home, he was different. Not tired, not worn down like a man who had buried himself in reports. No, Michael came home with a spark in his eyes, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He tried to hide it, but I noticed. Wives always notice. One night, I waited up for him. It was past 11 when the sound of his key scraped in the lock. He walked in, humming under his breath jacket slung carelessly over his shoulder. "Long day?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He froze for a second, then forced a yawn. "Exhausting. These projects are killing me." But his eyes betrayed him. They were too bright, too alive to belong to exhaustion. I studied him as he poured himself a glass of water. His tie was loose, but not in the weary way of a man crushed by work, more like he had loosened it, deliberately relaxed in the company he had kept. "Did you eat?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly, too quickly. "Grabbed something on the way." And just like that, he vanished into the bedroom, leaving me alone with my untouched questions. The silence was heavier than ever. At school, I found myself distracted, my patience thinning. I snapped at students for whispering something I never did. One boy asked if I was all right. The kindness in his young eyes nearly broke me. How do you explain to a 14-year-old that the person who promised to love you forever has forgotten how to see you? I began noticing little changes. Michael's shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not mine. A light floral scent, delicate, clinging to his collar. I would bury my face in the laundry basket, inhaling it like a punishment. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself stories. Maybe someone at work had hugged him in thanks. Maybe he walked past a woman who wore too much perfume. Maybe. But in the quiet of my heart, the truth whispered louder. One Friday evening, I suggested we have dinner together. I made his favorite roast chicken with rosemary. I lit candles, set the table, carefully put on the red blouse he once said he loved. He didn't come home. At 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "Working late. Don't wait up." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Then I blew out the candles, packed away the food, and sat in the dark kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator. When he finally stumbled in past midnight, I caught a glimpse of his phone lighting up. A message. "Anna, did you get home safe?" Safe? She cared if he got home safe. And I was just, what? The woman who folded his laundry and ate alone. The following week, I tried to break the silence. We sat in the living room, the television casting shadows on the walls. "Michael," I began softly, "is something wrong?" You're never home anymore. He didn't look at me. I told you. Work's crazy right now. Work, I repeated the word bitter on my tongue. Always work. His jaw tightened. What are you suggesting, Claire? I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, I'm suggesting that the man I married is in love with someone else. But fear knotted my throat. I'm not suggesting anything, I whispered. I just miss you. That should have cracked him, should have softened him. But he only sighed, stood, and walked away, as if my longing was a burden he didn't want to carry. I tried everything. I bought a new dress, styled my hair differently, even suggested we go out for a weekend getaway. He dismissed each attempt with the same excuse: too busy, too tired, not now. But not now began to feel like never. I started to watch him closely, the way he left the house with an extra bounce in his step, the way he checked his phone and smiled faintly at the screen. It was subtle, but it was there. The joy he no longer shared with me. One evening, when he said he was staying late again, I stood at the window watching him leave. His car didn't turn toward the office, it turned toward downtown. I stayed frozen at the glass, my hand pressed against the cool pane. He hadn't even bothered to lie well. My chest ached, but a new emotion bloomed beneath the hurt anger. Slow, quiet, simmering anger. At night, I lay awake in the empty half of the bed. I thought about the life we had built, 17 years, the house, the shared dreams, the whispered promises. And now, all of it threatened by a name I hadn't even seen in person. Anna. Who was she to him? Who was she to take what belonged to me? My mind spun with questions I couldn't yet ask, with answers I wasn't ready to face. I closed my eyes, whispering into the darkness. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The hardest part wasn't the late nights or the secret smiles. It was the way Michael's presence in our own home became smaller and smaller until it felt like I was living with a shadow. He stopped meeting my eyes. At first, I thought it was coincidence, him glancing at his plate instead of me at dinner, or looking past me when we spoke. But then it became obvious. He avoided my gaze deliberately, as though locking eyes with me might reveal too much, might force the truth out into the open. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table like strangers in a waiting room. The clinking of cutlery became unbearable. I tried to fill the silence with stories about school, about my students and their little dramas, but his answers were clipped hollow. That's nice. Mm-hmm. Good for them. Words with no life in them. Words that dropped like stones into a bottomless well. Sometimes I would stop mid-sentence just to see if he noticed. He didn't. His fork kept moving, his eyes fixed anywhere but on mine. It was like talking to the wall. At night, the space between us in bed grew wider. He no longer reached for me. I lay awake, staring at his back, wondering when the man I loved had disappeared. One morning, as he stood by the mirror adjusting his tie, I approached him with a tentative smile. Michael, do you want to have dinner together tonight? Just us. Maybe try that Italian place you love. He didn't even pause. Can't. Busy week. Deadlines. I touched his arm lightly. You're always busy. He pulled away as if my touch burned him. Claire, don't start. Don't start. The phrase slammed into me like a door shutting in my face. I bit my tongue, swallowed my hurt, and nodded. When he left, the house seemed to sigh with me. Even the small routines that once tied us together unraveled. He stopped leaving notes on the fridge reminding me to pick up milk. He stopped asking how my classes were going. He stopped noticing when I wore the blue dress he used to love. It was as though I had become invisible. And invisibility has a way of hollowing you out. I caught myself staring at my reflection longer than usual, wondering if something in me had changed. Had I aged suddenly overnight? Were the lines around my eyes deeper? Was my hair too dull, my smile too forced? But no matter how much I examined myself, the truth was clear. The change wasn't in me. It was in him. One evening, I tried again. He was on the couch scrolling through his phone, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Michael," I said softly, "what are you always looking at?" He snapped his head up too quickly and pressed the screen to his chest. "Work emails." "Work emails make you smile like that?" I asked before I could stop myself. His face hardened. "Claire, you're imagining things." But I wasn't. I knew that smile. It wasn't for me anymore. I sank into the armchair across from him, hugging a pillow to my chest. The silence stretched between us thicker than ever. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand the truth. But instead, I sat there feeling myself shrink in his presence. At school, I began to envy my students. They laughed, they whispered secrets, they lived in a world still full of possibilities. Meanwhile, my world was shrinking one wordless evening at a time. Even my colleague, Mrs. Harding, noticed. She caught me staring blankly at a pile of essays and touched my shoulder. "Claire, are you all right?" I forced a smile. Just tired. Tired. I had borrowed Michael's excuse, wearing it like a mask. The following weekend, I tried one last gesture. I baked his favorite pineapple with the crust exactly the way his mother used to make it. I set it on the table with 2 cups of coffee, waiting for him to join me. He walked in, glanced at the pie, and muttered, "I'm not hungry." My chest ached. "Michael, please. Can we just talk about anything? I feel like I don't know you anymore." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Claire, you're overthinking. Everything's fine. Everything's fine." The words were empty, a cruel echo of what used to be. I reached across the table, desperate. "Look at me. Just look at me and tell me the truth." But he didn't. His eyes slid away, fixing on the wall behind me. That was the moment I realized he had chosen not to see me. It wasn't that he couldn't, it was that he wouldn't. And that hurt more than anything else. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the untouched pie still on the table. The clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder of the growing distance. I whispered to the empty room, "How long can a marriage survive when one person disappears while still standing right in front of you?" But of course, there was no answer. Only silence. The same silence that had become my constant companion. The space between us had shrunk to nothing. And in that nothingness, I began to lose not only Michael, but myself. The first whispers didn't come from Michael. They came from the world around him, from the people who noticed what I couldn't see, or what I refused to admit. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I had stopped by the small cafe near Michael's office after school. I wanted to surprise him with his favorite coffee, and maybe walk home together the way we used to when life was simpler. As I waited for my order, I spotted a familiar face, Emily, an old friend of mine, who worked at a nearby law firm. She saw me before I could wave, and hurried over, her eyes flicking with something I couldn't quite name. "Claire," she said, hugging me lightly. What a surprise. We chatted for a few minutes, the easy small talk of old friends, until she leaned in, her voice dropping. "I didn't know Michael had a new assistant." I frowned. Assistant he doesn't. Why? Emily hesitated, biting her lip. "Oh, I must have misunderstood. I've seen him a couple of times leaving the cafe across the street with a younger woman. Thought maybe she worked with him." My stomach tightened. "You're sure it was him? Positive?" she said softly, her hand squeezing mine. "I didn't mean to upset you." I forced a smile. "It's fine. I'm sure it's just his colleague. He's been working late a lot." But my voice trembled. Emily's eyes lingered on me with pity, but she didn't press. She gave me a polite smile and left while I stood frozen, clutching the cup in my hand until the cardboard bent. That night, Michael came home late again. His tie was loose, his cheeks faintly flushed. He smelled faintly of wine, not the cheap kind we kept at home, but something richer, smoother. "Long day," I asked, my voice tight. "Exhausting," he muttered, dropping his bag by the door. "Deadlines. Deadlines." That word had become his shield. I set his coffee cup from earlier on the counter, unopened, untouched. "I stopped by your office today," I said casually. "Thought we could walk home together." His shoulders stiffened. "Oh, why didn't you call first?" I smiled faintly. "I wanted to surprise you." His eyes darted to the cup, then back to me. For a moment there was silence, heavy and sharp. Then he forced a yawn. "You shouldn't have wasted your time." I was swamped. Swamped. Another lie wrapped in the same tired excuse. The following week, another whisper reached me. This time from Mrs. Peterson, one of the older neighbors who lived across the street. She stopped me by the mailbox, her brow furrowed. "Claire, dear," she began cautiously, "I saw Michael downtown the other evening. He seemed to be in quite a hurry." I forced a polite smile. "He's been working late a lot." She nodded, then added gently, "He wasn't alone." My chest tightened. Who was he, with Mrs. Peterson's lips pressed together as though she regretted saying anything? A young woman, pretty with blonde hair. They seemed close. Her voice faded as she saw the color drain from my face. "I could be mistaken," she added quickly. "Don't trouble yourself." But the trouble was already rooted deep inside me. That night, I couldn't eat. I pushed food around my plate as Michael chatted about nothing in particular: traffic, the weather, a new project at work. His words fell flat, but his tone was lighter, as though he carried a secret joy that had nothing to do with me. I excused myself, retreating to the bedroom. I shut the door quietly and pressed my forehead against it, my heart pounding. Whispers from friends, glimpses from neighbors, a truth circling closer and closer like vultures waiting for me to stop pretending. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand answers. But every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped it shut. Because once the truth was spoken, there would be no going back. At school, I grew sharper, more brittle. My students noticed, though they didn't understand. I snapped at them for whispering, punished them for being late. I poured my anger into red ink, slashing across their essays with unnecessary force. At night, I stared at Michael as he scrolled on his phone, his lips curving in secret smiles. I wondered if it was her on the other end, Anna. The name felt poisonous now, coiling around my tongue like venom. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I was shopping for groceries when I spotted Emily again. She hesitated before approaching me, her eyes filled with the same pity as before. "Claire," she said softly, "I really didn't want to tell you this, but I saw them again yesterday. Michael and that woman. They were walking down Main Street, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world." My hands trembled around the shopping basket. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I thought you should know." I thanked her mechanically and left the store without finishing my shopping. My legs carried me home on autopilot, my chest hollow. That evening, as Michael prepared to leave again, I forced myself to ask, "Where are you going?" He slipped on his jacket without meeting my eyes. "Office. Reports. Due Monday." "Office," I repeated flatly. He nodded, kissed the air near my cheek, and walked out the door. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, my whole body trembling. The whispers had become undeniable. Everyone around me saw it, everyone except the man who owed me honesty, and me, the fool who clung to silence because the truth was too heavy to carry. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen listening to the echo of the door slamming behind him. The whispers were louder now, impossible to ignore, but I still wasn't ready to speak them aloud. Not yet. The truth didn't arrive with an argument or a confession. It slipped quietly into my life, tucked inside the device he guarded more than his own heart. Michael's phone had become his second skin. He carried it from room to room, never letting it rest out of reach. He even placed it face down on the table at dinner, as if turning the screen away would hide the light in his eyes whenever it buzzed. I tried to ignore it, tried to be the trusting wife I once was. But trust is fragile, and mine had already cracked. One evening, while he showered, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone on the nightstand. My pulse raced. I knew it was wrong. I knew if I crossed this line, there was no way back. But something inside me whispered, "You deserve to know." My hand shook as I picked it up. The screen lit with his smiling face, the same smile he no longer gave me. My heart clenched. I hesitated, then swiped. His passcode. I knew it. 17 years of marriage teaches you the pattern of a man's habits. And then I saw it. A photo. Michael and Anna shoulder to shoulder, laughing at something outside the frame. His arm brushed against hers, their closeness unmistakable. His smile was wide, unguarded, the kind of joy I hadn't seen directed at me in months. My throat tightened. The room blurred. I scrolled through more photos, each one a knife, her hand holding up a glass of wine, his grin across a restaurant table, the two of them standing close enough that a single breath could close the distance. There was no kiss. Nothing obscene. Just warmth, intimacy, unspoken promises carved into pixels. But sometimes it's the absence of restraint that screams the loudest. I dropped the phone onto the bed as though it burned. My chest heaved, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. The proof was there. No more whispers, no more suspicions. Anna wasn't just a colleague. She was the place where Michael had poured the affection he had once reserved for me. When Michael came out of the bathroom, towel draped around his neck, I forced myself to sit still. I wiped my face quickly, praying he wouldn't notice the redness in my eyes. "Long day," he said, glancing at me briefly before turning to the closet. I studied him, his shoulders broad, his movements calm. How could he act so normal while my world caved in? I wanted to scream. I saw the photos, I know. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Michael, do you still love me?" He froze just for a moment. His back stiffened, then relaxed. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in days. "Of course I do," he said. But the words were too smooth, too practiced. He leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and walked away, leaving me hollow. That night, I lay awake beside him, the memory of the photo burned into my mind. His smile so full, so alive, a smile I hadn't seen in years. I turned on my side, staring at the outline of his body in the dark. The weight of betrayal pressed heavy on my chest. I thought about confronting him, about throwing the phone in his face, demanding the truth. But fear wrapped itself around me like chains, because if I spoke, it would all be real. And I wasn't ready to hear him confirm what I already knew. Days blurred. I carried the secret like a stone in my pocket, heavy and unyielding. Every time Michael's phone buzzed, I imagined her name lighting up his screen. Every time he smiled faintly to himself, I saw her reflection in his eyes. At school, I couldn't focus. My students' voices blended into a dull hum. I caught myself staring at my desk, tracing patterns in the wood, lost in thoughts I couldn't escape. Even the simplest things became unbearable. Folding his shirts, I thought of her fingers brushing against his sleeve. Washing the dishes, I wondered if she had cooked for him. I was haunted by a woman I had never met. One evening, as Michael dressed to go out again, I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. Another late night, I asked, my voice brittle. He didn't look at me. "Yeah. Reports do." I bit back the words that wanted to spill out. Reports don't laugh at restaurants. Reports don't pose for photos. Instead, I whispered, "Don't stay out too late." He paused, glanced at me briefly, then nodded. "I won't." The door shut behind him, and the silence roared in its wake. That night, I sat in the dark living room staring at nothing. The photo replayed in my mind over and over, a cruel reminder of everything I was losing. Michael wasn't just distant. He wasn't just busy. He was elsewhere, heart, mind, and soul. And the worst part, I hadn't even confronted him. I had let silence swallow me whole, the same silence that had started this unraveling. The photo had given me truth, but it had also stolen my voice, and without my voice, I felt smaller, invisible. But deep inside, beneath the fear and heartbreak, a spark began to flicker. A whisper of something stronger, something that told me, one day you will not stay silent. One day you will make him see you again. Not yet, but soon. The photo stayed with me, haunting every corner of the house. It wasn't just an image, it was a wound, and each time I thought of it, the cut went deeper. For days I rehearsed words in my head. Michael, who is she to you? Michael, I saw the pictures. Michael, how long have you been lying? But when he walked through the door each evening, my voice betrayed me. The questions dissolved on my tongue, replaced by silence. Why? Because asking meant tearing apart the fragile thread that still bound us. Because once the truth was spoken aloud, there would be no more pretending. No more, hoping that maybe I was wrong. So I deferred. I swallowed my confrontation, burying it deep inside. Michael seemed almost too calm. He moved through the house with the air of a man confident his secrets were safe. He laughed into his phone when he thought I wasn't listening, the sound cutting through me like glass. At dinner, I watched him closely, searching for cracks. He praised Anna casually, weaving her into conversations as if testing how much I would tolerate. She's really sharp, you know. The way she handled that presentation, everyone was impressed. I stabbed my fork into my food, forcing a smile. Sounds like she's been good for the office. Yeah, he said, his tone warm in a way it hadn't been for me in months. She's refreshing. Refreshing. As though I were stale, worn out, a fixture he no longer noticed. One night, I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to numb the ache in my chest. Michael sat across from me, typing on his laptop. Michael, I said quietly. He glanced up. Yeah, I opened my mouth. Heart pounding. Tell him. Show him the photo. Demand the truth. But instead I asked, do you remember our trip to Maine? The cabin by the lake? His brow furrowed. Of course. Why, I sipped my wine, eyes stinging. You used to tell me everything back then. Even the little things. I miss that. He sighed, closing the laptop. Claire, we've been married a long time. Things change. People get busy. Busy, I repeated, bitterness coating the word. Don't do this, he muttered, standing. I don't have the energy. And just like that, the moment slipped away. My questions sank back into silence, leaving me drowning in the things I couldn't say. At school, my colleagues noticed my exhaustion. Mrs. Harding pulled me aside after class. Claire, you look pale. Are you sleeping? I forced a smile. I'm fine. Just stress. But at night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of his smile beside Anna's. I rehearsed again and again how I would confront him. Michael, I know. Michael stopped lying, yet each morning I woke with the same resolve to wait. Just one more day. The silence began to transform me. I became two people: the Claire who smiled politely at neighbors who taught her students about poetry, who played the role of a composed woman, and the Claire who, in the privacy of her home, felt herself unraveling, caught between rage and heartbreak. I started journaling late at night, scrawling words into the pages with shaking hands. Questions, accusations, desperate pleas. Why her? Why not me anymore? How did we get here? But the pages never left my bedside drawer. They were my secret confrontation when I wasn't brave enough to give voice to. The closest I came was one Saturday afternoon. Michael was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I walked over, stood in front of him, and said, Michael, do you have something to tell me? His eyes flicked up briefly, then back to his screen. Like what I swallowed. My heart hammered in my chest. Say it. Say her name. But fear won. Nothing, I whispered. He chuckled faintly, shaking his head. You're imagining things again. Imagining. That word cut deeper than a knife. That night, as he turned away from me in bed, I lay in the dark, whispering the words I hadn't dared to speak aloud. I saw the photos. I know about her. Why are you doing this to me? Of course he didn't hear. He was already asleep, his breathing steady while my chest ached with unspoken truths. Deferring the confrontation became its own torment. Each day I delayed the photo grew heavier in my memory. Each smile he gave to his phone instead of me carved another scar. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the silence and fear, a spark of defiance began to grow. Because silence can only hold for so long before it cracks. And when mine finally broke, I knew it would shatter everything. The cruelty wasn't always in what Michael hid. Sometimes it was in what he said openly. It began subtly small comments that slipped into our conversations. At first, I tried to brush them off, telling myself he didn't mean anything by them. But words once spoken leave marks. One evening, as I set dinner on the table, Michael glanced at the pasta and said, "Anna makes this incredible lasagna. She even makes her own pasta from scratch." I froze my hand tightening around the serving spoon. "That's nice," I murmured. He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. He just smiled, faintly lost in some memory that didn't belong to me. Over the next days, his comparisons grew bolder. At breakfast, as I graded essays, he said casually, "Anna's got such a sharp mind. She always sees angles no one else does. Makes me think differently." I swallowed hard. "Isn't that your job? To see the angles?" He chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Sure. But it's refreshing to have someone push me." Refreshing. That word again. He had used it once before, but now it stung sharper. As though I were stagnant water and she was a spring. At school, I couldn't shake his words. My students recited poetry, but instead of listening, I replayed Michael's tone in my mind. Admiring, warm, almost reverent. When had he last spoken about me that way? When had he last looked at me with admiration? The answer hurt, I couldn't remember. One evening, I suggested a walk after dinner, hoping to bridge the distance. He declined without hesitation. "I'm tired." I tried again. "We could use the time to talk, just the two of us." He sighed. "Claire, not everything has to be so serious. You overthink." Overthink. Another dismissal. But then, almost carelessly, he added, "Anna says walking clears her head. Maybe she's onto something." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So you'll walk with her, but not with me?" He looked up sharply as if I'd accused him of a crime. "Don't twist my words. I was just saying she has a point." But the damage was done. He had said it plainly, her ideas mattered. Mine didn't. The comparisons became sharper, less veiled. "She's got such energy. You should see her handle a meeting, everyone listens. She's funny. Really funny. Not like forced funny, just natural. She even knows a lot about literature." Surprising, right? We had this debate about Hemingway the other day. I sat there nodding faintly, my insides crumbling. I was the literature teacher, but he found her perspective more exciting. One night, unable to hold back, I asked, "Do you even see me anymore, Michael?" He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I do." "Then why do you only talk about her?" My voice cracked despite my effort to hold it steady. He set his fork down, his tone cold. "Claire, you're being dramatic. She's just a colleague. You're reading into things that aren't there." But his eyes betrayed him. They softened at her name, hardened at mine. I bit my lip, blinking back tears. "I feel invisible." He sighed, exasperated. "You're making this into something it's not." And just like that, the conversation ended. He returned to his food while I sat in silence, swallowing my hurt like broken glass. At night, I whispered the truth to the darkness. "You don't need to cheat with her, Michael. You've already replaced me in your heart." The comparisons weren't harmless. They were daggers slicing away at who I used to be in his eyes. Even my friends noticed. Emily, the one who had seen him downtown, invited me for coffee. She studied my pale face, my restless hands. "Claire," she said gently, "you don't look well." I forced a smile. "I'm fine." But then I broke. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I whispered, "He talks about her all the time, like she's everything I'm not." Emily squeezed my hand. "That's cruel." I nodded, but the word didn't feel strong enough. It wasn't just cruelty, it was erasure. At school, I overcompensated, pouring myself into lessons, trying to feel useful, visible. But every night I returned home to the same shrinking space, the same comparisons that chipped away at me. I stopped wearing the red blouse he once loved. I stopped baking pies, stopped suggesting dinners, stopped trying. Because no matter what I did, I was measured against someone else, someone who hadn't carried the weight of our marriage, who hadn't sacrificed years of her life building a home with him. Anna was new, exciting, untouched by reality. And I was invisible. One night, as I folded laundry, Michael wandered in. He picked up a shirt, smoothed it out, and said absent-mindedly, "Anna told me about this new cafe. We should try it sometime." I froze. We. He didn't even realize what he had said, that he and I had become interchangeable with him and her. My hands trembled as I folded the shirt. I wanted to scream, to hurl the clothes at him, to demand, "Why is she here in every conversation? Why am I the ghost in my own marriage?" But instead I whispered, "Maybe." Because once again, silence felt safer than the explosion I feared. That night, I stared at the ceiling, my heart heavy. He had compared me to her in every way, her humor, her intelligence, her energy. And though he hadn't said it outright, I knew the truth. In his eyes, Anna was better. And me, I was fading one comparison at a time. It was a Thursday when I finally decided I couldn't keep swallowing the silence. The weight of Michael's comparisons, his distance, the photographs I had hidden in my memory, they pressed on me until I could hardly breathe. If I didn't speak now, I felt I might vanish completely. So I planned a dinner. I told myself it would be calm, civilized, a chance to sit across from him, to hold his eyes and demand the truth. I cooked carefully, choosing his favorites: roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, steamed vegetables. I even opened a bottle of wine we had saved for special occasions, though I couldn't remember the last time we'd shared one. I set the table, lit 2 candles, and waited. When he walked in that evening, his surprise was fleeting. His eyes flicked over the table, then to me, standing there in a navy dress I hadn't worn in years. "What's this?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Dinner," I said simply. "Just us." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right." For the first few minutes we ate in silence, the clinking of silverware loud against the hush. I watched him closely, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes wandered, the way he chewed without tasting. Finally, I set down my fork. "Michael, we need to talk." His jaw tightened. "About what?" "About us," I whispered. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Claire, not this again." "Yes, this again." My voice shook, but I pushed forward. "You don't talk to me anymore. You don't look at me. You come home late. You smile at your phone. And when you do speak, it's always about her." His eyes flickered just for a second. Then he said flatly, "Her Anna." I said the name, burning on my tongue. "Your colleague." He laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You're jealous of a coworker, Claire. Do you even hear yourself? I saw the way you look at her." I pressed my hands, trembling. "I saw the photos." That stopped him. His face paled, then hardened. "You went through my phone," I swallowed. "I needed to know the truth." "The truth." He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "The truth is, you've built some fantasy in your head because you can't stand the fact that I have a life outside this house." My chest tightened. "A life outside this house, Michael. I am your wife. This is supposed to be our life." He scoffed. "You're suffocating me, Claire. Always questioning, always assuming the worst. Do you know how exhausting that is? The words cut deeper than any confession could have. He didn't deny it. He didn't soothe me. He blamed me. I blinked back tears. Exhausting. You think my pain is exhausting? He pushed his chair back, running a hand through his hair. God, you don't get it. Anna listens. She doesn't nag, she doesn't interrogate. She just understands. There it was. The admission he hadn't meant to say aloud. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. So you admit it? I whispered. He froze, realizing too late what had slipped. His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he muttered, "It's not what you think." Then tell me what it is, I demanded. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Tell me why you look at her the way you used to look at me. Tell me why she knows your smile and I don't anymore. He stared at me, his eyes cold. Maybe because you stopped being the woman I married. The words hit like a slap. My breath caught in my throat. I had expected lies, denials, excuses. I hadn't expected him to throw me under the weight of his betrayal. I gave you everything, I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. 17 years, Michael. And you erase me for a woman you've known for months. He looked away, his silence heavier than any confession. I rose slowly from my chair, my legs trembling. I don't know who you are anymore, he muttered almost under his breath. Maybe you never did. That was the final blow. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the candles flickering, the wine untouched. In the bedroom, I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking with sobs. Through the door, I heard him moving around, heard the creak of the couch as he settled there instead of joining me. That night, the house felt colder than it ever had before. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in my mind. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? Because for the first time, I began to imagine not just enduring the betrayal, but exposing it, letting the truth bleed into the open where neither Michael nor Anna could hide. After that dinner, something inside me snapped. Michael thought he could twist the truth, deflect blame, make me feel like I was the problem. But his words only sharpened my resolve. I couldn't live in uncertainty anymore. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So one evening, when he muttered the usual excuse, "Late meeting, don't wait up," I didn't stay home. I grabbed my coat, slipped into my car, and followed him. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I kept a careful distance, headlights dimmed. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might drown out the sound of the engine. I had never done anything like this before, and yet it felt inevitable. Michael's car didn't turn toward his office. It veered downtown just as I had suspected. He parked near a cozy restaurant tucked between boutiques, a place that glowed with warm light and soft laughter spilling through the windows. I pulled over across the street, my breath fogging the glass as I watched, and then I saw her. Anna. Blonde hair catching the light, a scarf draped carelessly around her shoulders. She stepped out of the restaurant, smiling the same smile that had haunted my imagination. And Michael was beside her, his posture relaxed, his face alight with a joy I hadn't seen in years. They didn't touch, not overtly, but intimacy doesn't always need touch. It was in the way they leaned toward each other, the way his gaze lingered, the way her laugh spilled into the night, like music meant only for him. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might break. This wasn't just a colleague. This wasn't harmless. This was betrayal written in body language, in stolen smiles, in the very air between them. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm across the street to drag him away, to confront them both right there under the glow of the street lamp. But another part of me, quieter, colder, told me to wait, to watch, to gather proof. So I stayed, my heart aching as they walked side by side down the street, their laughter echoing. Michael didn't look like a man weighed down by stress or deadlines. He looked like a man set free. And I, his wife, the woman who had built a life with him, was the cage he had already stepped out of. I followed them as they strolled to a small bookstore nearby. Through the window, I saw them browsing side by side, their heads close together, whispering and laughing at something on the page of a book. I remembered the nights when Michael and I had done the same thing years ago in the early days of our marriage, when everything felt like an adventure. Seeing him repeat that intimacy with her was like watching my memories be stolen and repurposed. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep watching. After nearly an hour, they returned to the restaurant. I saw him hold the door open for her, his hand lingering just slightly on her back. That was enough. I had my answer. I drove home in silence, my mind a storm. Every mile was heavy with betrayal, every streetlight illuminating the truth I had refused to face. By the time I parked in our driveway, my body was trembling. I stumbled inside, collapsed onto the couch, and buried my face in my hands. He came home hours later, smelling faintly of wine, his jacket draped casually over his arm. "Long night," he said, as though nothing had happened. I forced myself to nod, my voice caught in my throat. "Long night," I echoed. He kissed my forehead lightly, mechanically, before heading to the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, staring into the dark. The image of him with Anna replayed again and again, her laugh, his smile, the way the world around them seemed to fade. There was no denying it anymore. The truth wasn't hidden in his phone or whispered by friends or hinted at in comparisons. The truth had unfolded before my eyes under the glow of street lamps and the warmth of a bookstore window. And it had broken something in me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. The next morning, Michael acted as though nothing had changed. He made coffee, kissed my cheek, left for work with the same hollow words, "See you tonight." But inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't just the wife waiting at home anymore. I was the woman who had seen the betrayal with her own eyes. And now, I had a choice. I could continue to shrink, to defer, to swallow the silence until it consumed me. Or I could gather my strength, reclaim my voice, and decide what kind of ending this story would have. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. Because once you see the truth with your own eyes, there's no going back. And I knew the next time Michael lied to me, I wouldn't stay silent. The morning after I followed Michael, I moved like a ghost through the house. I made coffee, I washed the dishes, I even packed his lunch. But every motion was mechanical. My body went through the motions of being his wife, while my mind replayed the scene of him and Anna laughing under the streetlight. When he came downstairs, adjusting his tie, he looked refreshed, almost boyish. He poured himself coffee and glanced at me. "You're quiet today." I studied him, my chest aching. Quiet. If only he knew the storm that raged inside me. "Just tired," I whispered. He didn't notice the way my hands clenched around the edge of the counter. He kissed my cheek absently, muttered his usual, "See you tonight," and left. The door closed and I sank onto a chair, my body trembling. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The silence that had kept me chained was ready to break. That evening when he returned, I was waiting in the living room. I didn't set the table. I didn't cook dinner. I simply sat with his phone in my hand, the photo already pulled up on the screen. He froze when he saw me. "Claire, what are you doing with my phone?" I lifted it, my eyes locked on his. "I know, Michael. I know everything." His face paled. "What are you talking about?" I turned the screen toward him, the photo of him and Anna, their laughter captured in pixels. "This. And not just this. I saw you. Last night. At the restaurant. At the bookstore. I followed you." For a moment he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Then instead of shame, his expression hardened into anger. "You had no right," he snapped. "Going through my phone, following me. Do you know how insane that is?" I rose slowly, my hands trembling. "Insane, Michael. I watched you. I saw the way you look at her. Don't you dare stand there and pretend I'm imagining things." He raked a hand through his hair, pacing the room. So what if I had dinner with a colleague? So what if I enjoy her company? You're blowing this out of proportion. I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. Don't do that. Don't twist this into my fault. You haven't looked at me in months. You've replaced me, Michael. Admit it. He stopped, pacing, his eyes cold, detached. Maybe if you'd been more present, I wouldn't have needed someone else to talk to. The words hit me like a punch. My knees nearly buckled. More present, I whispered. I've been here, Michael. Every night waiting for you. Cooking for you. Loving you. And you made me invisible. His voice rose. And you've been suffocating me. Do you know how exhausting it is to come home to suspicion, to silence, to a wife who only sees what's wrong? I stared at him, my chest heaving. I didn't make this silence, Michael. You did. You shut me out. You gave your laughter to her. You gave us to her. For a long moment, we just stood there staring at each other across the gulf that had grown between us. Finally, he said, his voice flat. I'm not doing this with you right now. And just like that, he grabbed his jacket, stormed out the door, and left me standing in the wreckage of our marriage. I sank to the floor, sobs tearing out of me, my hands clutching at my chest as though I could hold my heart together. His cold dismissal was worse than the betrayal itself, because in that moment I realized he didn't care. Not about me, not about us, not about the 17 years we had built together. He had chosen her even if he hadn't said the words outright. His anger, his blame, his refusal to fight for us, it was all the proof I needed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the photo still glowing faintly on the phone screen. I stared at it until the lines blurred, until Anna's smile merged with Michael's, until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for him, every dream I had bent to fit his, and now he had erased me with a single choice. But beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred, a flicker of strength. Because if he thought he could dismiss me, silence me, erase me, he was wrong. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. When dawn broke, I looked out at the rising sun and whispered to myself, this isn't the end of my story. This is just the beginning. And for the first time in months, I believed it. The morning after Michael stormed out, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My eyes were swollen from tears, my hair tangled, my skin pale. But behind the exhaustion was something sharper, a clarity I hadn't felt in months. He thought he could erase me. He thought he could blame me for his betrayal, make me question my worth. But all he had really done was awaken something I had buried for too long, the part of me that refused to be broken. For years, I had lived for him, cooking his meals, folding his shirts, waiting for him to come home. I had poured myself into our marriage until there was nothing left of me. And what had it earned me? Silence, comparisons, betrayal. I couldn't let him define me anymore. So I began small. At school, instead of drifting through lessons, I poured myself into them. I told my students to dig deeper into the texts, to look for truths hidden between the lines. As I spoke, I realized I was speaking to myself as much as to them. My words grew stronger, steadier, and for the first time in weeks, I felt alive in my own skin. I started journaling again, not just questions and despair, but declarations. I am more than his wife. I am more than his silence. I am still here. Each sentence became a stone, building me back up. When friends asked how I was doing, I stopped saying fine. I met Emily for coffee and told her everything, the photos, the late nights, the confrontation. She held my hand, her eyes fierce with sympathy. You don't deserve this, Claire, she said firmly. Don't let him make you feel small. Her words echoed in my heart. Don't let him make you feel small. At home, I no longer scrambled to please him. I stopped cooking elaborate dinners that went uneaten. I stopped waiting by the window for his car to return. I began reclaiming the house as mine, lighting candles for myself, reading books I loved, playing music in the kitchen just because it made me smile. It felt strange at first, this shift, but slowly the weight of invisibility began to lift. Michael noticed. One evening, he walked in to find me curled on the couch with a glass of wine, laughing at a novel. "What's so funny?" he asked, his tone almost suspicious. I glanced up casually. "Just a story." He frowned as though my laughter were foreign. Perhaps it was. I hadn't laughed in front of him in months. Another night, he asked, "Aren't you making dinner?" I shrugged. "I already ate." He blinked, caught off guard. "Without me?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Without you." The silence that followed was his, not mine. For once, he was the one left out in the cold. But reclaiming myself wasn't enough. The anger simmered, still quiet but relentless. He had humiliated me, erased me, and dared to blame me for his betrayal. I couldn't let it end there. I didn't want to scream or beg. I didn't want to stoop to his level. No, my reckoning would be quiet, deliberate, undeniable. So I began gathering. The photos on his phone. The text messages I glimpsed when his screen lit up. The whispers from friends who had seen him downtown. Each piece became a shard of proof tucked carefully away. At first, I wasn't sure what I would do with them. Divorce exposure. Simply holding them as my silent arsenal. But the very act of collecting them gave me strength. It reminded me that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't crazy, that my reality was real. One afternoon, as I sat with Emily in the cafe, she asked, "What will you do, Claire? Will you confront him again?" I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into dark spirals. "Not yet. He thinks he's untouchable, that I'll stay silent. Let him think that. The longer he believes it, the stronger I become." Emily studied me, then smiled faintly. "You sound different." "I am different," I said quietly. "I've been broken, but I'm rebuilding. And when I'm ready, he won't see it coming." At night, when Michael turned away in bed, I no longer whispered questions into the dark. Instead, I whispered promises to myself. "You will not be erased. You will not let this define you. You will decide how this ends." And with each whispered vow, the spark inside me grew brighter. One evening, as I passed the hallway mirror, I paused. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see a ghost. I saw a woman standing tall, her eyes clear, her jaw set. I saw a woman who had survived betrayal and was learning to turn it into power. The reckoning hadn't come yet, but it was near. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be with screams or begging. It would be with quiet strength, undeniable proof, and the certainty that I had found my voice again. Michael thought he had silenced me, but in truth, he had awakened me. The day of reckoning came quietly, without warning, like a storm that brews unnoticed until the first strike of lightning. Michael had been growing bolder. He no longer bothered to hide his late nights. He came home with excuses rehearsed but half-hearted, as if he knew I would no longer question them. He thought he had won, that my silence meant surrender. But silence is never surrender. It's preparation. I chose a Sunday afternoon when Michael's family had gathered at his parents' house for his father's birthday. His sisters, his brother, his mother, all of them were there, laughing, chatting, toasting. I sat among them, smiling politely, my arsenal tucked neatly into a folder inside my purse. Michael arrived late, as always. He kissed his mother's cheek, clapped his brother on the shoulder, and slid into the chair across from me. Our eyes met briefly, his calm mind steady. He had no idea what was about to happen. After dinner, as the plates were cleared and everyone settled with coffee and cake, I rose slowly. My voice trembled at first, but then it steadied stronger with each word. "There's something I need to say." The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. Michael's brow furrowed. "Claire, what are you doing?" I pulled the folder from my purse and placed it on the table. 17 years of marriage, 17 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, and this is what I get in return. I opened the folder and spread the photographs across the table. Michael's smile, Anna's laughter, the intimacy they had tried to disguise. Gasps rippled through the room. His sister covered her mouth. His mother whispered, "Michael." He reached for the photos, his face pale. "Claire, stop this." "Not here." "Yes, here," I said firmly. My voice didn't shake anymore. "Because for months you made me feel invisible. You shut me out. You compared me to her. You blamed me for your betrayal. And I stayed silent thinking I was protecting our marriage. But the truth deserves to be seen." Michael's jaw tightened. "You're humiliating yourself." I shook my head. "No. You humiliated me long before this moment. You humiliated me every time you came home smelling of her perfume, every time you praised her while ignoring me, every time you smiled at your phone instead of at your wife." The room was still. His family stared stunned into silence. Michael tried to recover. "She's exaggerating. Anna is just a friend, a colleague." I cut him off. "Enough. I followed you, Michael. I saw you with my own eyes. The dinners, the bookstore, the smiles. Don't you dare stand here and call me a liar." His silence was louder than any denial. His eyes flicked to his mother, who looked at him with disappointment so sharp it pierced the air. For the first time, he had no shield, no excuses. And for the first time, I felt taller than him. I gathered the photos, slid them back into the folder, and tucked it into my purse. Then I straightened my shoulders. "I don't care what you do with her, Michael. You've already made your choice. But I won't let you erase me anymore. I am not invisible. Not to myself. Not to anyone." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting in the ruins of his lies. Back home, I lit a candle in the quiet kitchen. The house felt different, not empty, but mine again. The silence that had once suffocated me now felt like freedom. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the fading light. For the first time in months, my chest didn't ache. The tears came, but they were cleansing. Not the tears of a broken woman, but of one who had finally chosen herself. In the days that followed, Michael tried to reach me. Texts, calls, half-hearted apologies. But I didn't answer. His words no longer had power over me. Instead, I focused on myself. I took long walks. I spent time with Emily. I rediscovered the books I loved. I laughed again. Real laughter. The kind that came from inside me, not borrowed from someone else. The students noticed too. "You seem happier, Mrs. Donovan," one girl said shyly. I smiled. "I suppose I am. Because happiness doesn't always come from holding on. Sometimes it comes from letting go." I don't know what the future holds. Maybe divorce? Maybe rebuilding my life from scratch. But I do know this: I will never again shrink into silence for someone else's comfort. Michael taught me that betrayal can break you. But he also taught me that breaking isn't the end, it's the beginning of becoming someone stronger. And Anna, she may have won Michael's attention, but she will never have my power. As I close this chapter of my life, I want to leave you with this. Silence can feel safe, but it can also destroy you. Don't let anyone make you feel invisible. Don't let anyone convince you that your pain is too small to speak aloud. I stayed quiet for too long. But when I finally spoke, I found my voice again, and I will never lose it. So if you're listening and you've ever felt erased, ever felt compared, ever felt like your love was no longer enough, know this: you are not invisible. You are not replaceable. And one day you will find your voice too. The candle flickered, casting shadows across the walls. I sipped my wine, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than I had in years. This wasn't the ending I had imagined for my marriage, but it was the beginning of something else, something truer. My story, my strength, my truth. And I would never again let it be silenced. Slow, emotional, fade out, 250 words. Sometimes I still think about the woman I used to be, the one who sat in silence at the dinner table waiting for scraps of conversation, hoping to be seen. I grieve for her because she loved with everything she had. But I don't pity her. She was the foundation of the woman I am now, a woman who can sit in her own company and feel whole, who no longer measures her worth through someone else's eyes. Michael's betrayal didn't define me, it revealed me. And though my marriage may be ending, my story is just beginning. To anyone listening who has carried the same silence, I want to say this: you are stronger than you know. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Don't wait for someone else to validate it. Speak it, claim it, live it. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't anger or destruction. It's becoming someone they can never erase. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been in a situation like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have stayed silent or spoken sooner? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories like mine. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's worth more than you think.